My name is Mia, and I'm the type of person who's always been content with blending into the background. I'm not the one who walks into a room and lights it up with a smile, or starts a conversation with anyone who crosses their path. No, I prefer the quiet corners, the shadows where I can watch the world go by without being noticed. I'm not shy, exactly. I've never been a wallflower. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that I wasn't built for the kind of attention people like Sarah crave. My best friend is the complete opposite of me. Outgoing, the life of every party, the kind of person people remember. I wasn't always like this. I remember a time when I had big dreams. Dreams of being the person everyone admired, the one who walked into any room and commanded attention, who could make people laugh, who knew exactly what to say to make everyone feel at ease. But somewhere between middle school and adulthood, I lost that girl. Maybe it was the constant comparisons to others, or the feeling that no matter how hard I tried, I could never be as confident as the people around me. Slowly, the desire to stand out faded, replaced by a comfort in remaining unnoticed. It's not that I'm unhappy with my life, Percy. I have good friends, a job that pays the bills, and a comfortable routine. But there's always this undercurrent of dissatisfaction, a sense that I'm capable of so much more but can never quite push myself to reach for it. The small moments of triumph don't feel like enough, and sometimes I find myself daydreaming about a life where I'm the one leading the charge, not the one sitting on the sidelines. I spend weekends doing what I know best, curling up with a book or watching Netflix, escaping into fictional worlds where the characters take charge of their destinies.
It's easier that way.
It's easier to dream about being someone else than to take the steps to become that person. But deep down, I've always known that something is missing. A part of me longs for the confidence that I see in others, the feeling of being seen, of walking into a room with my head held high, knowing I belong. Every now and then, I catch myself wondering, what if I could be the person who doesn't hesitate to speak up, to be the life of the party, to shine in a way I've never allowed myself to before? It's a fleeting thought, one I dismiss just as quickly. After all, who am I kidding? I'm just Mia, the quiet one, the observer, the one who never quite fits in. Or at least, that's what I've convinced myself for years. What if it's time to see if I'm capable of more? But the thought always hangs in the air, unanswered, like a dream that I'm too afraid to chase. Until that one night when everything changed. It all started on Sarah's birthday. She had been planning her party for weeks, an extravagant event at one of the hottest clubs in town, the kind of night you never forget. I had no intention of going. Not because I didn't want to celebrate her, but because it was one of those nights I knew would make me feel more invisible than ever. I could already picture the scene. Sarah, glowing as always, the center of attention, while I hovered by the bar, nursing a drink, waiting for the night to end. But Sarah wouldn't hear of it. "You're coming, Mia." "No excuses," she insisted, her voice lively on the phone. "You've been stuck in your shell long enough. It's time to get out there. You'll have fun, I promise." I hesitated, my mind swirling with 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't go, but she wasn't having it. "It's not just about me, Mia. You deserve to have a great night, too. Come on. What's the worst that could happen?" Reluctantly, I agreed, mostly because I couldn't bear to disappoint her. I spent hours getting ready, staring at my reflection, wondering if this was the night I would push myself to be different, to be someone I could be proud of. But deep down, I was terrified. When I walked into the club, the music was pulsing, the lights flashing in vibrant colors. The energy in the air was electric, but I felt completely out of place. I scanned the crowd, and sure enough, there was Sarah, surrounded by friends, laughing, glowing as always. But I didn't feel like I belonged. Just as I was about to retreat to the quieter corners, Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me into the crowd. "Okay, here's the deal," she said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "You're not leaving this party until you're the queen of it. I dare you to be the life of the night, Mia. You've got this in you.
Trust me."
I stared at her, my heart pounding.
"What?"
"Are you serious?" "Oh, I'm dead serious," she smirked, her voice full of excitement. "You've got all the potential in the world to make this night unforgettable. Now, go prove it." My first instinct was to laugh it off, to tell her that wasn't me. But something shifted in that moment, a flicker of something inside me that said, what if? What if I could? What if, for once, I didn't hide in the shadows? As I stood there, the music blaring around me, I felt a tiny spark of possibility, and before I could talk myself out of it, I took my first step toward the dance floor. The music was deafening, and the crowd around me was a blur of flashing lights and movement. I stood there, unsure, my feet glued to the ground. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to find an escape, but the weight of Sarah's dare hung over me, like a challenge I couldn't back out of. What did she mean by the queen of the night? I thought. I wasn't the type of person to demand attention or make a scene. I wasn't outgoing, wasn't bold, and definitely wasn't someone who could just be the center of anything, especially not in a place like this. I could feel my heart racing, my palms damp with anxiety. My breath was shallow, and I suddenly felt like everyone in the room was watching me. You don't belong here, my mind whispered. Why did you even come? But just as I was about to back out of the dare completely, I felt a familiar hand on my shoulder. It was Sarah. She was grinning, eyes wide with excitement, like she knew something I didn't. Mia, you okay? She asked, her voice rising above the music. I don't know. This isn't really my thing, Sarah. I'm not like you. She cocked her head to the side. What do you mean? You're stronger than you think. You're just afraid to show it. You've got everything you need to make this night yours. Don't hide anymore. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Don't hide anymore. She didn't know how much I wanted to hide. I wanted to blend into the background, unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. I had always been the quiet one, the observer, the person who didn't take up space. For years, I had convinced myself that I was better off that way, safe in the shadows, where no one could judge me. But Sarah's faith in me made me pause. She was right. There was something inside me that I had kept buried, something I had never let out. Maybe I was afraid of failing, afraid of being rejected. But what if, just for once, I didn't let fear control me? I looked at Sarah, and despite the nervousness in my chest, I nodded. Okay, I whispered. I'll do it. I'll try. Her eyes lit up. That's my girl. With a deep breath, I moved away from the corner where I had been standing, my feet now finding their rhythm on the dance floor. For the first time that night, I didn't feel like a stranger to the music. The beat seeped into me, pulling me along, and I started to sway, gently at first. But as the music surged, so did something else inside me, a quiet confidence I hadn't realized I had. I let go of the self-doubt, the fear of looking foolish, and just moved. Slowly, people started to notice. At first, it was just a few glances, curious eyes scanning me, probably wondering who this girl was who seemed to come out of nowhere. But I didn't stop. I danced a little more, a little bolder each time. It wasn't perfect, not by any stretch. My movements were stiff, hesitant, but with each song, I felt less awkward. And then it happened. I caught a glimpse of someone watching me, not just anyone, but a group of people. At first, I froze. My stomach dropped, and I could feel my face turning crimson. But then I remembered Sarah's words. You've got everything you need to make this night yours. And in that moment, I realized, maybe I'm not as invisible as I thought. I kept dancing, letting the music push me forward, and something unexpected began to happen. I began to lose myself in the rhythm, in the joy of just being there, fully present. People around me started to smile. Some even joined in, pulling me into their energy. A small ripple in the crowd became a wave, and I found myself laughing, feeling light, unburdened by the usual weight of self-doubt. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being the best dancer in the room. It was about showing up, really showing up, and letting go of the fear that had kept me hidden for so long. And just like that, I was no longer the quiet wallflower in the back of the room. I was part of the pulse of the night, a small but undeniable presence. As the night wore on, I took more risks, spoke to strangers, laughed more freely. I had moments of self-doubt, yes, but each time I pushed through it, I felt stronger. I was exploring a part of myself I had never known, this person who wasn't afraid to be seen, who wasn't defined by the quiet girl I thought I had to be. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It wasn't like I became someone completely different, but in those small steps, those moments of courage, no matter how tiny, I was discovering the person I had buried for so long. The person who wasn't afraid to step into the spotlight, if only for a few minutes. By the time the night started winding down, I realized something simple but profound. Maybe I don't need to hide after all. The following days were a whirlwind, but not in the way I had hoped. I had left that party feeling like a different person, like I had finally stepped into my own skin. But the truth was, things weren't so easy when the music stopped and the lights dimmed. Reality was much harder to navigate than the freedom I had briefly felt in that club. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages, most of them from Sarah. She was still riding high on her excitement from the night, and her words were full of praise and encouragement. But as much as I tried to enjoy the feeling of validation, a creeping doubt took root. I wasn't sure if the version of myself that had danced so freely was the real me, or if it had been a mask, a one-night persona that couldn't survive the daylight. At school, things weren't much different. As I walked through the halls, I could feel the eyes on me. Whispers floated in the air, and I could hear snippets of conversations that included my name. Some were full of praise for how I had come out of my shell, but there were also others that made me uneasy. I caught a few laughs, the kind that made me wonder if people were laughing at me or with me. "You're actually starting to become fun," Lily, a girl from my history class, said to me as we passed in the hallway. Her words seemed harmless enough, but the way she said it, like she was surprised, hit me hard. Fun. I had spent so long trying to be serious, trying to fit a mold that people expected of me. Now that I was branching out, it felt like I was being judged for stepping out of line. In a way, the doubts I had suppressed the night of the party came flooding back. I wasn't sure how to handle the fact that people had seen me differently, or how to reconcile the part of me that was still scared of standing out with the part that had so joyfully danced the night away. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at lunch with Sarah, who was her usual vibrant self, sharing stories about the party. I tried to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. The constant pressure to be something I wasn't sure I was ready for was overwhelming. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," I blurted out, the words escaping before I could stop them. Sarah paused, her expression softening. "What do you mean?" she asked, clearly puzzled by my sudden change in tone. "I feel like everyone's expecting me to be, I don't know, this new person. But it's hard to keep up with. Every time I try, I feel like I'm just faking it." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I regretted saying anything at all. But then Sarah reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "Mia, listen to me. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. You're just figuring out who you are, and that's okay." But even as she said the words, I felt the weight of my insecurities press down on me even harder. What if she was wrong? What if I wasn't meant to be bold? What if I was just pretending to be someone I wasn't? The next week, things got worse. The whispers turned into comments, and the people who had cheered me on at the party seemed to shift their opinions. I overheard some girls laughing about the way I had danced, how awkward I looked, how out of place I had seemed. The comments stung more than I cared to admit. It felt like no matter how much I tried to embrace this new side of myself, I couldn't escape the judgment of others. The same people who had once cheered me on now seemed to be putting me under a microscope, waiting for me to slip up. One evening, as I was walking home from school, I caught sight of my reflection in a store window. I stopped, staring at the girl who looked back at me. She was still the same Mia, the girl who wore oversized sweaters to hide her body, who kept her head down, who didn't want to be noticed. The confidence I had felt that night at the party seemed so distant now. It felt like a dream, something that wasn't really me. I didn't know how to make that version of myself last. "Why are you so scared?" I muttered under my breath, frustrated with myself. Why can't I just be who I am without worrying about what everyone else thinks? As I continued walking home, I felt defeated. The excitement I had felt just days ago seemed like a distant memory. The world around me felt heavy, full of expectations that I wasn't sure I could meet. Would I ever be able to truly be myself, or would I always be caught between who I was supposed to be and who I wanted to be? But even in that moment of doubt, there was something small, something faint that kept me moving forward. It was the tiniest spark of hope, a reminder that I had already taken that first step. I didn't know where this journey would lead, but I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close to finding out who I really was. And so, despite the fear and the insecurities, I kept going. Because for the first time in my life, I had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was worth the fight. The breakthrough came on a Saturday evening, just a few days after I had hit my lowest point. I had been hiding out at home, retreating into the comfort of my room, away from the whispers and judging eyes. But then something shifted inside me, something I couldn't ignore any longer. It was as if my fear had finally reached its limit, and the courage I had buried deep inside me was pushing to the surface. It started with this simple decision. I was going to go out. No excuses. No hiding behind the walls I had built around myself. I'd learned enough from Sarah and the people who genuinely supported me that I didn't need to be perfect, I just needed to be real. That night, as I looked into the mirror, I saw myself in a new light. I had chosen an outfit that made me feel powerful, an off-the-shoulder top paired with my favorite jeans, simple but bold. My hair was a bit messier than usual, but I liked it. For the first time in ages, I wasn't trying to fit someone else's definition of beauty. I wasn't hiding behind a mask or pretending to be someone I wasn't. My reflection didn't just look different. I felt different. The tightness in my chest that I had grown so accustomed to, the pressure to conform, was gone. In its place was a sense of liberation, like I could finally breathe. When I walked into the cafe where Sarah had asked me to meet her, I could see the surprise in her eyes before she masked it with a grin. "Whoa," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "You look amazing. Where's the shy Mia I've been hanging out with?" I smiled, a genuine, unrestrained smile. "She's gone. For good." And in that moment, I realized how true that statement was. The girl who had spent years hiding in the background, the one who was afraid of making mistakes, was no longer in control. Instead, I was starting to take the reins of my own life. As the night wore on, I felt a shift in the way people saw me and in the way I saw myself. People who had once looked right through me now smiled and greeted me, their eyes no longer filled with judgment, but curiosity. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could finally engage with the world around me on my own terms. Later that evening, when a group of friends invited me to join their table, I felt an unfamiliar surge of excitement rather than anxiety. This was my moment. I wasn't holding back or second-guessing myself. I was present, fully, in every conversation. I cracked jokes, I laughed, I danced when the music played louder. For the first time, I felt like I belonged, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was myself. When Sarah looked at me across the table, her eyes wide with pride, I felt something shift. It wasn't just her approval that mattered anymore. It was my own. For the first time, I was no longer looking for validation. I had finally found it within myself. The night ended with a deep sense of satisfaction in my heart. I had stepped into my own skin in a way I hadn't been able to before. I felt lighter, freer, and most importantly, I felt whole. As I left the cafe that night, walking through the cool air with Sarah by my side, I realized that I had transformed. Not just in how I looked, but in how I carried myself, how I saw the world, and how I finally accepted who I was. The girl who had been afraid to be seen, who had tried to shrink to fit in, was now standing tall, no longer hiding. And the best part? I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. The party was in full swing, the music pulsing through the air like a heartbeat. People were laughing, dancing, chatting, and it felt like the entire room was alive with energy. But for me, it was different now. I was no longer the girl standing in the corner, avoiding attention. I was part of the celebration, in the thick of it, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was finally myself. And then it happened. A voice, sharp and piercing, sliced through the music. "Mia?" I turned, a sinking feeling forming in my stomach as I saw Laura, one of the popular girls, approaching with a smug smile on her face. Laura had been a part of the group who had judged me for years, a constant reminder of the high school hierarchy that had made me feel small. Her words were always laced with sarcasm, and I couldn't help but brace myself for whatever she was about to say. "Nice outfit," Laura said, her eyes sweeping me from head to toe, the look in her gaze like she was sizing me up, ready to tear me apart if I let her. I knew she was trying to provoke me, trying to bring me back to that version of myself who would shrink in the face of her judgment. The old Mia would have backed down, would have stammered an apology, or tried to justify herself. But not this time. The old Mia was gone. Taking a deep breath, I stood taller, feeling a fire burn in my chest. "Thanks," I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I like it too." Her smile faltered for just a moment, surprise flashing in her eyes before she masked it with her usual condescension. "Yeah, well, you're really bold for showing up here after." "Well, she said, her voice dripping with meaning. The words stung, but I didn't let them land. I could feel the old insecurities creeping up, the whispers of my past self begging me to shrink back, to let her win. But instead, I held my ground. This time, I was ready. "You think I don't know what you mean?" I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, I used to be afraid of what people like you thought of me. But not anymore. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not just to fit in with people who don't care about me. And I'm not letting you drag me back into that." There was a beat of silence, the kind that always feels heavier than it should. And then, something unexpected happened. Laura blinked, her expression softening for just a moment, before she scoffed and turned away. "Whatever," she muttered, walking off, clearly caught off guard by my reaction. As I stood there, the weight of the moment hit me all at once. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the sheer power of the moment, the overwhelming realization that I had just confronted my biggest fear and walked away victorious. I had faced the person who had once made me feel invisible, who had helped build the walls around me, and I had come out stronger. I hadn't just stood up for myself in that moment. I had stood up for everything I had worked through, everything I had transformed into. The crowd seemed to part, like the universe itself was giving me room to breathe. Sarah appeared by my side, her eyes wide with admiration. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled me into a hug. "You did it," she whispered in my ear, her voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, I realized that I had done it. I wasn't the same person I had been just a few weeks ago, hiding in the shadows. I was stronger, braver, and unapologetically myself. And no one, not even the people who had once tried to tear me down, could take that away from me. The music swirled around us as we stood there, and I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. This was it. This was the moment where my transformation was complete. And as I looked around, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next, not as someone hiding from the world, but as someone who had finally learned to live in it, fully and without fear. A few weeks had passed since that night at the party, and everything felt different. It wasn't just my appearance that had changed, or the way I walked into a room with more confidence, though both of those were true.
It was the way I saw myself.
At school, people didn't look at me the same way anymore. The whispers had faded into the background, replaced by genuine conversations and unexpected smiles. I found myself talking to people I'd never had the courage to approach before, students I'd always viewed from the outside, too afraid to even say hello. Now I was laughing with them, sharing jokes, and feeling like I belonged in ways I hadn't known were possible. But it wasn't just the external changes that mattered. The real transformation was in how I interacted with myself. I'd started to believe that I deserved to take up space, that I had something valuable to offer beyond the walls of self-doubt I'd built for so long. I no longer measured my worth by the approval of others. It was a strange, liberating feeling, like I had finally learned how to breathe freely. Sarah was still by my side, the friend who had helped me through the hardest moments. Her support had been unwavering, but now I felt like I was able to give as much as I received. We spent afternoons together, laughing and talking about the future, our hopes, our dreams, and the lives we wanted to create. The bond we shared felt deeper than it ever had before, built on mutual respect and shared growth. But the most surprising change had been in my relationship with Laura. After the confrontation at the party, she didn't treat me the same way. We didn't become friends. She wasn't someone I needed in my life, but there was a mutual understanding now. She no longer saw me as an easy target for her sharp words. And that, in itself, was a victory. I had come to realize that my transformation wasn't just about overcoming others' perceptions. It was about learning to see myself through a lens of love and acceptance. I had found a new purpose, a deeper sense of self-worth, and I was ready to move forward, unafraid to embrace who I truly was. As I stood on the edge of graduation, looking out at the future, I knew I had already made the most important change. I had learned to love myself. And that was something no one could ever take away. The journey I embarked on wasn't just about becoming the life of the party. It was about discovering my own worth, embracing who I truly am, and learning that I don't need anyone's approval to feel good about myself. Through the challenges, the doubts, and the moments of insecurity, I found that the greatest transformation happens within. We all have hidden strengths, talents, and dreams waiting to be unlocked, but it begins with accepting ourselves, flaws and all. The path to self-love isn't always easy, but it's the most rewarding one we can take. So remember, you are enough just as you are. And when you begin to believe in yourself, the world will follow.